Hello everybody, I'm Brian Hengesbaugh, partner at Baker McKenzie in Chicago, and welcome to our four-part series on what does GDPR really mean for B2B companies, business-to-business companies. I think in many ways the consumer-facing enterprises are very aware of GDPR and know that this new European General Data Protection Regulation is going to apply to them in many ways. B2B companies typically have not been in the crosshairs of data protection privacy rules, but are certainly swept in here. In many ways, the GDPR rules affect B2B companies in two big picture ways. One relates to their internal human resources data, and the other relates to everything else, mostly what they're doing with data that they get from their customers or in connection with servicing their customers and flowing down to vendors. The human resources data piece we've already dealt with in another series on what does GDPR really mean for HR data, and you can find that on our Doing Business Globally website, or you can find it on Vimeo directly, or you can just message me and I will get you a link for that series. So for the human resources aspect of B2B business, take a look at that series. So there's four key issues or four key areas we want to focus on in terms of what does GDPR really mean for B2B companies. And the first one we're going to talk about right in this segment, part one, which deals with understanding your role. Are you a controller? Are you a processor? What's your role with respect to data? Part two is going to cover IT performance standards. What are the information technology performance standards that arise out of GDPR, and how is it that that impacts what you do with respect to your customers? A third level is going to be data security and breach notification. What do you need to worry about there? And then a fourth is going to be a bit of a wrap-up of how do we bring a lot of the different elements into our customer contracting process. But let's start right at the beginning. What is your role under the European General Data Protection Regulation? We all know, of course, that GDPR is going to become effective in May of 2018. It's not like it's brand new rules out of nowhere. We've had from 1995 the European Data Protection Directive, which has been implemented in member state law. So these definitions of controller processor have been around for a while. If you're a provider to customers in the B2B space, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you may have defaulted to assuming, or your customers may have defaulted to assuming, that you are what's called a processor with respect to data that you obtain from them. And that is somebody who takes instructions only, does what they're told, and really stays outside of the scope of much of the direct regulation, and instead, not completely, but largely stayed outside of the scope of direct regulation, and instead mostly complied with customer instructions, comparable to what a business associate had been under HIPAA up until high-tech came in and then applied some rules directly to business associates. So the big picture question you have is, what is my role? Am I a processor taking instructions, or am I a controller who has the ability and the authority to decide the purposes or means of processing data? There's no one-size-fits-all answer to that question, and in fact, as a provider, you should be right now doing an assessment of what role you think you play with respect to each of your lines of business. There may be different answers. Even within a single line of business, you may have different outcomes on that question. For example, you may have a platform that you make available to your corporate customers, which they in turn make available to their employees. And your customers' employees might dial directly into your platform and might be providing some information. There could be two different layers of data that's at play there. One might be the user information that the employees themselves are throwing off when they log into your system. And for that information, you might look like a controller owner who decides the purposes and means of processing. In other words, you might be using that data for your own information security systems. You might have various analytics or other things you're doing with respect to the usage information directly into your platform. Conversely, data that the employees are providing, if they're uploading an Excel spreadsheet that might have consumer data in it or other employee data, and et cetera, that might be data that more appropriately you are just a processor, and it's really your customer who owns that data. Why is this important? It's important on many levels. It's important in terms of how much direct regulatory duty you are taking on. If you are a controller, you have more direct regulatory duty under GDPR, and that means everything from making sure there are good notices to getting consent when needed, addressing legitimacy, cross-border transfer, a whole bunch of issues, right? If you're a processor under GDPR, you still will have some direct duties. It's mostly focused on things like information security and breach notification and telling your customer what has happened if there is indeed an incident, rather than having a lot of direct duties. So a lot of strategic decisions. I would say think about it line by line, business line by business line, and individual data flows within it. Really figure out what your role is, and then know that in the customer discussions that you are going to have on this, know that it is not a zero-sum game. It is a win-win proposition. If you can properly isolate what really your role is, and you can bring that to your customer contracting and have good dialogues with your customers, you'll both end up in a better compliance position. So really key stuff, and thanks for watching.